this past Wednesday night, I got a new appreciation, and we've been mixing the age groups on our Wednesday night small groups for the last little while, and I just had a new appreciation for the fact of the various cultures within us and among us. I mean, I'm always kind of aware that there are those of us who kind of grew up in church and have done the church thing for basically our whole life, and there are those of us who didn't grow up in church. We didn't do that. All that kind of stuff was kind of forward, and maybe we just went friends every now and then, but that wasn't really a part of our life until recently. But I have new appreciation for those of us that went to church basically all our life, but had very different experiences. Some of you, and particularly those of you who are older, but it's not just those of you who are older, you grew up in a church environment where you needed to look right, you needed to act right, you needed to dress right, you needed to conform, and if you had problems, you basically needed to keep them to yourself because that was not to be brought out in a church. You were supposed to be fine. In fact, I learned as a kid, because I had sort of this environment, it wasn't too stifling, but it's sort of this environment as a kid at church, that I learned that when somebody asked you how you're doing, the answer was just fine. I mean, I go into the church building, I'm 7 or 8 years old, and how are you doing? Just fine. How are you doing? Just fine. How are you doing? Just fine. Just fine was the word, and it was always just fine. It didn't matter what was going on. I was always just fine. This is the way it went. And some of us, especially those who are younger, depending on where we grew up and everything, we grew up in an environment that was a little bit more like what I began to experience some in high school and then more in college and a little bit as a young adult. And that is meeting with Christians in smaller groups and it being okay not to be just fine. To be able to share your weaknesses, to be able to share your faults, your struggles, and those to be understood and accepted, and where you felt like you could belong. I mean, it was okay to admit that you weren't just fine, that you weren't okay. The interesting thing about that is that I think part of it is just our culture has changed. In our culture in general, we kind of emphasize, be yourself, be who you are. It's okay not to be perfect. That's the way everybody. We kind of encourage that in our culture. But what I've found is that just because we can express that we're not okay, if we can express our struggles, it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to do anything about it. We almost feel like, those of us who kind of have grown up in this sort of more sharing environment, we almost feel like just the act of talking about it is somehow makes it better. Which in many cases it does. It's important. I mean, it's hugely important to be honest and admit your faults and struggles. But a lot of times, we might be in, say, a small group, and 3 or 4 years ago, we say, yeah, I really need to work on my say, for example, we need to work on my speech, my talking, I need to be kind to people, I want to stop cussing, I want to say things that honor God, I just really need to work on my speech. And then 3 or 4 years later, we may be saying the exact same thing. I mean, because it doesn't necessarily mean, just because we're talking about it, doesn't necessarily mean we're going to do something about it. And what we've been experiencing so far in 1 John, as we've been looking at that book, is that John says, look, yes, you must be honest and open that you have sin in your life, and you need to be specific about it, and you need to not pretend. You're not just fine. You don't need to pretend to be just fine. But you need to actually take a step. You actually need to do something about those things in your life that are amiss. Simply just talking about it, simply hearing lessons about it, simply being at church and kind of having contact with what's right. No, you actually need to put that into your life. You need to depend on God, depend on His Spirit to help you change what you cannot change on your own, and to allow Him to work that change in you and for it to change your life. A couple weeks ago, we were talking in 1 John, and John, this is by the way, the person who wrote this little book. It's a little letter, and it was the Apostle John, who hung out with Jesus for a long time, okay, so he kind of knew what he was talking about. But he said, it's very possible for you to think that you are in the light. And by in the light, he meant in God. You may think that you belong to God. You may think that you're a Christian and yet be deceived. It is possible to think you are a Christian, to think you are a follower of Jesus and be deceived, which is kind of disturbing. But then he goes and says, there is evidence. There is a way to tell whether or not you truly belong to God, whether you truly are a child of God, are a Christian. And he gives three evidences. Now, these aren't the only evidences, but these are three big ones. And these are the ones that he emphasizes just over and over in this little letter. And the first one we talked about last week, and that is that if you are in the light, you are someone who not only listens to, but does what Jesus says. You don't just hear what Jesus says. You don't just talk about what Jesus says, but you begin to put it into practice. Now, do you put it into practice perfectly? Not at all. But you don't content yourself with just hearing. You actually listen to Jesus and what he says and what he did, and you actually try to be like him. You want to think like he thought and like he thinks. You want to love like he loves. You want to serve like he serves. And when he speaks, you listen and you try to put that into practice. That is a sign, that is evidence that you belong to him. Now, as I tried to emphasize last week, these evidences that he gives are not steps of salvation. These are not things you do to get saved. You cannot, okay, if I do what Jesus says, then I'll be saved. No, there is nothing you can do to earn your salvation. It is by grace. When you put your faith in Jesus, God pours his grace on you. And when you experience God's grace of cleaning you and making you new and making you his child, it changes you. It changes what you want. And so it changes what you do. And so these are evident. These are things that naturally come out of someone who has experienced the grace of God, has become his child, has become a new person. These are things that come out. And so one of the evidences is that you actually do what Jesus says. Now, that's a little overwhelming because, again, this Wednesday night we tried to name as many commands of Jesus as we could think of. It's like, what did Jesus command? And we started trying to, spit out different commands that Jesus says. And it gets overwhelming pretty quick because Jesus, he said quite a bit. He said quite a bit. So it's like, man. But Jesus had a way of kind of simplifying things, boiling it down and making it easier, giving you an entry point. And John does the exact same thing. He says, you know that you're a follower of Jesus if you keep his commands. And let me give you sort of the core main one. Okay, this is the one that if you keep this one, all the rest are going to tend to come more naturally, are going to come easier because they kind of fit in with it. Okay, you pay attention to this one command. That gets you going. That gets you on the right road. So, he gives us basically evidence number 2 by telling us this one single command. And it is an interesting way he presents it. He leads it up to it quite a bit. Let's look in 1 John chapter 2, verse 7 through 11. We just finished talking about how if you belong to Jesus, then you listen to what he says. You do his commands. And then he says, dear friends, this word dear friends has the word love in it. It's this like agape love. It's just like, hey, you are my beloved. I am telling you this because I love you. Dear friends, I am not writing you a new command, but an old one, which you have had since the beginning. This old command is the message you have heard. Yet I am writing you a new command. Its truth is seen in him and in you, because the darkness is passing and the true light is shining. John has an incredible way of speaking in a way that when you first read it, you have no idea what he's saying. It's like, okay, no new command, old command, it's like, what is going on there? It really kind of can wash over us. But he says, basically, I'm giving you this new, he says, I'm giving you an old command. A command that you have had since the day you became a follower of Jesus. Okay? This was part of the gospel message that was preached to you. So you have heard this before. It's an old command. At the same time, it's new. It's new. You hear it, and it becomes new all over again. It becomes real in your life. The reality of this command has a way of just opening your eyes to things that you didn't see before. It's new as well as old. Well, what is this command? The funny thing is he doesn't even tell us directly. He does eventually, down the line. He's going to tell us directly. But right now, he assumes that we know which command he's talking about. At least his original hearers, he assumes that we know what command he is talking about. Well, before we spoil the surprise, and go to the next little deal, what could it be? What command is it that John could be talking about that Jesus gave? This old but new command. Well, it reminds us of something that Jesus said and that John recorded in the Gospel of John. He also wrote a gospel, a whole story of Jesus. He quoted Jesus as saying this. Jesus said to his disciples, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Here's this new command that Jesus gave. And Jesus gave it as, this is the primary evidence that people will know that you're a follower of Jesus. That if you love your fellow believers, now you've got to love all the people in the world, but here in particular we're focusing on, if you love your fellow believers, truly love them, that is going to be the greatest sign that you belong to Jesus. I don't know about you, but that has always disturbed me a bit. As someone who, and I'm one of those kids who, I grew up in the church and all that, this has always disturbed me a bit. Because I didn't really see in my church and our Western churches in general, I didn't really see this standout love that testified to the world that we were followers of Jesus. That bothers me. It still bothers me. We'll talk about that later on, but we'll just hold on to that thought for now. Okay, so Jesus tells this new command. Is this the one? Is this the one that John is talking about, this new old command that he's going to give to us, that he's building up to? Well, he confirms it, okay? Back to 1 John. He kind of goes in the back door, though. Anyone who claims to be in the light but hates a brother or sister is still in the darkness. Anyone who loves their brother and sister lives in the light, and there is nothing in them to make them stumble. But anyone who hates a brother or sister is in the darkness and walks around in the darkness. They do not know where they are going because the darkness has blinded them. John assumes that his readers know what this new command is, this old command is, this old new command is that he is given to them. And that is to love your brother, to love your sister. You cannot hate a fellow Christian, anyone for that matter, but in particular, a fellow Christian, and be in God's light. John here, he takes it kind of from the negative aspect. Rather than just saying, you need to love one another, he starts out with, if you hate, then you are in the darkness. You are walking around the darkness. If you hate a fellow believer, you may think you're part of God's family, you may think you are a Christian, but you are in the dark. It has blinded you. You cannot see where to go. You cannot see what is real because that hate blinds you and it messes everything up. Now, if that makes you just a little bit uncomfortable, let me tell you what to me is the easiest way around this truth, okay? If you have hate in your heart towards someone, or if you suspect that you might have hate in your heart towards someone, but you don't want to deal with it, and you want to know, I'm okay, no, this is all right, and you want to justify it, and you want to do it, there is a way around it. And the way, to me, the easiest way around it is to say, well, I don't hate him. I don't hate her. No, I mean, I can't stand him, and I hope he gets what's coming to him, but, I don't hate anybody. Which kind of leads to the question, okay, well then how do you define hate? Okay, at what point does it go from I strongly dislike them to I hate them? Okay, when does that do that? Well, to me, the answer to that is pretty simple, okay? And that is this. If I wish harm on someone, I hate them. If I want them to hurt, perhaps like I hurt, I hate them. If I want them to be humiliated, perhaps the way they have humiliated me, I hate them. You want to know the quickest road to hate? Maybe the quickest road to hate is jealousy. Just a little bit later in chapter 3, John kind of comes back to this theme over and over in the book of John. We're going to see that. But just a little bit later in chapter 3, John says this. He says, "For this is the message you heard from the beginning. We should love one another." Oh, now he says it. Okay, now he just flat out says it. This is that beginning. This is that new message. We should love one another. "Do not be like Cain, who belonged to the evil one and murdered his brother." And why did he murder him? Because his own actions were evil and his brothers were righteous. And he says, "We know that we have passed from death to life because we love each other. Anyone who does not love remains in death. Anyone who hates a brother or sister is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life residing in him." Now, he's not saying that a murderer cannot be forgiven. He's saying if you have hate within your heart, you cannot have eternal life in your heart. So why did Cain murder his brother? Because he was jealous. Now, you can be jealous of somebody because they're doing right and you're not doing right, and that can cause jealousy. But you can also be jealous of somebody because they're doing wrong. And you don't necessarily want to be them, but even though they're doing wrong, they're getting something that you want. And that jealousy comes up. Either way, if you feel jealousy coming up in your heart, and hey, I know what it feels like to have jealousy come up in my heart. Yeah, I imagine you do too. When you feel jealousy coming up in your heart, look out. Because hate is right behind it. Hate is right there. Be afraid. Be terrified of jealousy. Because jealousy in a moment leads to hate. And hate destroys lives, destroys relationships. Another way that hate can creep into a Christian's life, sometimes explode into a Christian's life, is to be hurt. To be hurt by somebody else. Just speak the truth. Christians can be jerks. And I know this because I am very capable of being one myself. It wasn't very long ago when I was in a hurry. And I was driving. I came to a stop sign, and there, the street was going across, and they didn't have a stop sign. But I came to the stop sign, and I needed to turn right. I saw this car coming. I didn't want to wait for him, and I just gunned it, pulled out in front of him. Now, it wasn't like super pulled out in front of them, but it was enough where they had to brake. Okay, they had to brake, and as I saw that grill coming up in my rearview mirror, I could just feel them saying, "Jerk." And they were right. And I knew they were right. I was inconsiderate. It was unloving. It was unkind. I was being a jerk. I was just thinking about myself. Here's the deal. Christians have issues. Christians have issues. The church, and I'm not talking about the church building. I'm talking about the group of the church family. The church is a hospital for sinners. And we are all at different stages of immaturity. Notice I didn't say maturity. We are at different stages of immaturity. And the truth is not all of us are even growing. Not everybody that gathers with the church is even growing. Some of us are part of the church just because that's what we're supposed to be. There's no passion for God. There's no mission to others. We're in the hospital, but we're on life support. We're not going anywhere. We're just doing this thing. And really what we're doing is denying Christ by our life and causing the church to decay. Some of us think we are growing, but our motives betray us. For us, the church is kind of a club that we can belong to. We can build our sense of identity, our sense of status and self-esteem. We get positive affirmation from others for doing religious things, and we think we're helping run the hospital when in reality we're in ICU because our motives are not right. It's about us. And those of us in the church who are growing are growing. We're not anywhere close to maturity yet. We're like the 4-year-old. Well, I have a 4-year-old daughter. And she's only 3 feet tall. She's only 3 feet tall. How is she going to get on in life? How is she going to drive? I mean, you can't even reach the pedals at 3 feet tall. She can't reach the cabinet deals. How is she going to function in this life? She's only 3 feet tall. And I give her simple math problems. You know, what's 36 plus 78? And she has no idea. She can't think of it. How is she going to function in this world without simple math skills? And spiritually, I mean, when it comes time for her to pray, she just kind of recites the same things over and over. And you know, there's not no. Where's the spiritual depth in that? Where's the connection to God? She just seems like she's kind of daydreaming through her prayer. You know, should I be concerned? No. No, why? She's 4, okay? She's 4, and she's growing. She's growing, she's developing, she's learning. Her mental, her physical, her spiritual self is developing and growing. That takes time. Now, if she stops growing, if for an extended time, I mean, if she goes and she stops growing for an extended period of time, well, we're going to be concerned. We're going to look into this. We're going to be concerned. But if she's growing, she's exactly where she needs to be. The same is true with us. If we are growing, if we are stretching, if we are not only learning but putting into practice what we're learning, and we're making mistakes along the way, we're not doing right, we're struggling with our motives, but we are growing. We're letting God work in us and change us and move us. That is exactly where we need to be. You know, I'm not concerned that I don't have it all together, and I don't. I'm not concerned that I don't have it all together. I'm not concerned that I haven't reached full spiritual maturity. But now I will be very concerned if I stop growing, if I stop stretching, if my relationship with God, my relationship with His people, if my ability to serve God and to bless other people and to reach out to other people, if that's not growing, if that's not developing, I have reason to be concerned. Because we are only human, as God created us to be human, when we're growing. We're only healthy human when we're growing. Well, what I'm trying to get at when I talk about how we're not there yet, how some of us are growing, some of us are not growing. The church is not, I mean, we have issues. The church has issues because I have issues, because we have issues. The reason I talk all about that is because we can hurt one another. Because of our spiritual immaturity, because of the selfish nature that keeps on grabbing at us and wanting to get us back, we can hurt each other. We can do stupid and hurtful things, and sometimes without even realizing it. Sometimes without even having any idea of the damage that we're doing, because we don't have a lot of spiritual wisdom yet. Maybe we're not really accustomed yet to God's Spirit controlling our lives. Maybe our sinful nature still has too much hold. The question is, how can we deal with the hurts? How can we deal with the interpersonal problems with love rather than hate? Let me be clear about something, okay? You don't have to trust everybody. You don't even have to trust every believer. In fact, there are people that you don't need to trust. Jesus did not trust everybody. John, in the Gospel of John, he relates a time where he says many people saw the signs Jesus was performing, believed in his name, but Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all people. He did not need testimony about mankind, for he knew what was in a person. Jesus knew there were some people he could not trust. Now, did this mean he did not care for them? Did this mean he did not teach them? Did this mean he did not help them and love them and die for them? No, he did all of that. You don't have to trust a person to love them. Look, if there's somebody that gossips about me, I don't trust them. I don't trust them. But actually, if I hear them gossiping about anybody, I don't trust them, because I know if they can gossip about somebody else, they can gossip about me. You know, if you hear somebody gossip, you know, okay, I know something. I can't really trust myself with them. But even if someone does something harmful to me, even if a fellow believer does something harmful to me, that does not destroy, if you're a child of God, that does not destroy your ability to care for them and to desire their well-being, to desire good for them. That is exactly what Jesus did and does. Why? Why is it that what someone does to me has nothing to do with the mandate that I have to love them back? How could that be? The reason is this: because our love for people is in no way dependent on their love for us. Look at what John says later on in 1 John, as he goes back to this subject once again. He says, we love because he first loved us. I don't get my ability to love you because you love me. I get my ability to love you because he loves me. And if I have experienced his love for me, and if his love for me is pouring into my heart, then I have the ability to love people who hate me. If that doesn't make any sense to you, if that is not something that you experience, that you know is true because of what God is doing in you, then maybe you have not yet received the grace of God. Maybe you have not yet put your trust in him so that you open your heart to receive his grace, to receive his love, so that you now have the ability to love anybody. See, John won't let us get by with thinking, well, okay, maybe I sort of hate somebody, but you know, I have reason to. I have plenty of reason to. I've got good reason to, and you know, I can follow Jesus, and you know, this can be on the side. See, John says, no, that doesn't work that way. He continues this. He says, we love because he first loved us. Whoever claims to love God, yet hates a brother or sister, is a liar. And for whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. And he has given us this command: anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister. So, if you have hate toward another person, especially another believer, this for you, this is a moment of truth. A moment in which, if you let it, a light is shining on the darkness in your heart. And a voice behind that light is saying, I love you. That is enough. I love you. That is enough. It is his love that makes you able to love the one you hate. So let him love you. Let God love you. Let him cleanse you from all that you have done, from all that you are, from all the dirtiness, the filthiness, the hatred that is within. Let Him free you from that by His grace and make you new. Bow your head and your heart and your life to Him. Let His love so overrun your heart that you can forgive and love anyone. Let's pray.